Montana Territory, August 1877. They were still laughing when she stepped forward, dust rising behind her boots. Elira Langston stood at the edge of the corral, hands clenched tight at her sides, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. The cowhands, all sunburned and swaggering, jeered and nudged one another, their voices cutting through the dry air like spurs. "You lost, sweetheart," one of them hollered. "This ain't a quilting circle. I want to ride," Elira said, louder this time. "That roan gelding. I can handle him." Laughter broke out again, sharper now, like a whip crack. They leaned on the fence rails and shook their heads, glancing toward the bunkhouse where the cook stood watching from the porch, arms crossed. "She wants to ride," another man chuckled. "What next, gonna ask to brand cattle too?" But then a voice, low and clear, cut through the noise like a knife through canvas. "Let her borrow my horse," the man said, stepping from the shade of the barn. "And my name?" Elira turned. The cowboy who had spoken wasn't one of the loud ones. He had been sitting quiet on a hay bale, a tin cup in his hand, legs stretched out like he had nowhere to be. But now he was walking toward her, tall, lean, and steady. His eyes were the kind of blue that looked almost gray in the sun, and his jaw was dark with stubble. "Your name?" she asked, barely above a whisper. He stopped beside her, close enough that she could smell the leather and dust on him. "They will not laugh if they think you belong to someone," he said softly. "That is how it is out here." She blinked, caught between gratitude and pride. "And you are offering to be someone?" He looked down at her, one corner of his mouth lifting, not a smile, just a flicker of something softer than heat. "Name's Varen Dorsey," he said. "That mare is mine. If you can ride her, you can ride anything." Elira nodded once. "Then I will." The others quieted as Varen led her into the corral and handed her the reins. The roan snorted, pawed the dirt. She met the gelding's eye, calm and certain, then swung up into the saddle like she had been born in it. She rode once around the pen, then twice, faster each time, her braid whipping behind her. By the third circuit, she had the horse stretched into a gallop, hooves thundering. The men had stopped laughing. By the time she slid down, cheeks flushed and eyes blazing, the only sound was the wind over the dry grass. Varen stood there, arms folded, watching her. "You do not ride like someone who just learned." "I did not," she said, brushing hair from her face. "My father was a cavalry scout. I was on a horse before I could walk." He nodded. "Then why come here asking?" She swallowed. "Because I need work. And no one hires a woman alone unless she is carrying a tray or sewing buttons." At that, Varen's face shifted. Not pity, just understanding. He jerked his chin toward the barn. "Come on. If you can ride like that, you can help break the new colts." Elira followed, her heart still hammering, though not from the ride. Varen Dorsey had not just given her his horse. He had given her a chance. They worked side by side for the next 2 weeks. Varen showed her the ropes around the ranch, though she already knew most of them. She helped mend fences, worked colts, and took her meals with the hands, always keeping her distance, always watching. But Varen? He watched her too. They talked in bits and pieces, usually while shoeing a horse or riding out to check the herd. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, she listened. And when she spoke, he listened harder. One evening, while the sun bled gold over the prairie, she found him by the fence, fixing a loose rail. "You were not surprised I could ride," she said. He glanced up. "No, why?" "You had fire in your eyes," he said. "That does not come from nowhere." She shifted, folding her arms. "I came here because I had no choice. My brother left me with nothing, sold the house, took the money, and vanished." Varen set down his hammer. "You have no family left? None that will write back?" He nodded slowly. "Then you have something in common with me." She looked at him. "You lost yours." "Not lost. Left. After the war, I had nothing to go back to in Virginia. Came west, tried to make sense of things." She stepped a little closer. "Did you?" He looked at her, really looked. "Not until recently." Silence stretched between them, but it was not empty. It was full of something unspoken, rising slow and steady like a river after spring thaw. By the third week, they had fallen into a rhythm. She trusted him. He trusted her. When a colt bucked her into the dust, he was the first by her side. When he came back one night with a gash on his arm from a barbed wire fence, She cleaned and stitched it by lamplight, her hands steady even though her heart was racing. "You should rest," she said when it was done. He caught her wrist gently. "You should stay." She paused. "Why?" He let go but held her gaze. "Because you do not have to keep running. You could have something here. With me." She blinked, her throat tight. "You barely know me. I know you do not give up. I know you ride better than most men. I know you have not once asked for more than you earned." She swallowed. "And you would give me your name?" "I already did." Her breath caught. "I meant it," he said, softer now. "Elira, you are not just passing through. You belong here. If you want." She nodded, slow at first, then faster. "I do." Varen stepped close, brushing dust from her cheek with his thumb. "Then stay." She did. And that night, for the first time in years, she slept without fear. With the wind outside and Varen's hand resting over hers, Elira Langston let herself believe in something lasting. And neither of them heard laughter again. By early September, the frost had started to kiss the grass before dawn, silvering it in the hush before the sun crested the distant pines. Elira rose when the sky was still the color of cold iron, pulling on her worn coat and stepping out into the quiet yard, the smell of wood smoke and dew thick in the air. Inside the barn, she found Varen saddling 2 horses. He glanced at her once, then back to the cinch. "We've got a stray bull up near the North Ridge," he said. "You up for a day in the saddle?" She tugged her gloves on. "I didn't stay here to sit warm by the stove." He handed her the reins without another word. They didn't need much talk between them anymore. Not when the rhythm of their days had settled into something steady, something that held. They rode out side by side, the land unfolding around them in muted tones: burnt sage, gold grass, the dark slash of the Bitterroot Range in the far-off distance. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was companionable, like a worn quilt well known to the hands. They found the bull tangled in brush not far from the creek, his flank scraped from a failed attempt to push through. Varen drew close, speaking low to the animal while Elira looped her rope with quick, practiced hands. They worked in tandem, wordless and sure, until the bull was freed and trailing grudgingly behind them. Afterward, they rested beneath a cottonwood, the horses cropping grass nearby, the bull sulking in the shade. Varen pulled a tin of beans from his saddlebag and handed her a spoon. "You ever think about leaving Montana?" Elira took a bite before answering. "Not anymore." He looked at her, not pressing. She leaned back against the tree. "I used to think I'd end up in Denver. Maybe teach. Maybe so. But I think I always knew I'd end up where the land felt bigger than the noise." Varen nodded slowly. "You fit here." She turned her head toward him. "And you? You ever think about going farther west?" "I did," he said. "Once. Before I realized I wasn't chasing a place. Just trying to outrun myself." The wind moved through the cottonwood leaves, soft and dry. "When did you stop running?" she asked. He hesitated, then said, "When you asked to ride." Elira's throat tightened, but she didn't look away. He studied the ground for a long breath, then said, "I've been thinking about building a cabin, not far from the creek. Higher ground. Good trees for framing." She watched him. "You building it for yourself?" "No," he said quietly. "Not just for me." The sun had shifted behind the clouds, casting the prairie in softer light. Elira drew her knees up, resting her arms across them. "You don't talk around what you mean, do you?" she said. "I've done enough circling in my life. Don't see the use anymore." She nodded once, slow. "Then I'll be plain too. If you build it, I'll help raise the walls." He looked at her, something unspoken flickering in his eyes, and then without reaching for her, without moving an inch, he said, "That'd be home enough for me." She didn't answer, but she didn't have to. The way she looked at him said more than words would have carried. They rode back as night settled in, the bull trailing reluctantly behind. The sky stretched deep and bruised above them, and the wind carried the scent of pine and wood ash. When they passed the edge of the pasture, Varen slowed his horse. "There's a stand of spruce near the creek bend," he said. "Good place for a foundation." "I saw it," she replied. "It'll hold through a hard winter." He nodded once. Then it settled. Elira looked ahead, toward the dark line of trees. "Feels like something's beginning," she said. Varen's voice was quiet. "It is." By late October, the days had narrowed, and the mornings came edged with a brittle chill that lingered long after the sun rose. The last of the cattle had been moved to winter pasture, and the ranch hands rode slower now, their voices quieter, as if the cold asked them to speak only what mattered. Elira stood near the creek bend, sleeves rolled to her elbows, her palms rough with pitch from the spruce logs they'd hauled. The first timbers of the cabin stood staked in the ground, squared and leveled. She traced a hand along the beam, feeling the faint tremble of wind through the wood. Varen knelt a few yards off, fitting the corner joints with a mallet and chisel. His hat was pushed back, and his hair darker than it first looked in the sun fell across his brow. "Elira," he said without looking up, "what's your favorite season?" She brushed a curl from her cheek with her wrist. "Spring. When the snow's half melted and you can still smell it, but the grass knows it's safe to appear." He paused in his work. "That's a good answer. You?" I leaned toward fall. "The world gets honest in autumn. No more pretending." She stepped closer, handing him another chisel. "You weren't raised with winters like these, were you?" "No. Snow came light where I lived. But the cold here, it teaches you to take stock, to keep what's worth holding close." He tapped the chisel into place, then looked at her. "You ever think of leaving again? Not because you have to, just to see something new." She shook her head. "I've seen enough. What I want now is to build something that stays standing." He held her gaze for a breath longer than was easy. "I used to think I'd never build anything again," he said. "After the war, I couldn't hammer a nail without remembering what I'd helped tear down." Elira didn't speak, but she reached for another log, dragging it toward the frame. They worked through midday, side by side, the rhythm of saw and mallet filling the space between words. When they paused for water, he passed her his flask and nodded toward the ridge. "There's a hot spring up past those trees," he said. "About a mile in, hidden in a fold of stone. We used to take the horses up there in deep winter, let them soak their legs." She wiped her mouth with the back of her hand. "A spring that stays warm in snow? Sounds like a place worth knowing." He studied her. "I'll take you there. When the first snow falls." Elira lowered the flask. "That a promise?" "It is." The sky had begun to shift toward evening, the light turning amber against the hills. They packed their tools in silence, the kind that comes at the end of honest work. As they walked back toward the bunkhouse, she asked, "You believe in signs, Varen? Not in the way folks mean, but sometimes the land tells you what you need to hear." She nodded slowly. "I dreamed of this place before I ever saw it. Not the land exactly, but the feeling. Like if I stayed still long enough, something would find me." Varen glanced sideways. "And did it?" "I think so," she said. "But it's not a thing. It's a person." He didn't answer, but his hand brushed hers as they walked, and this time, she didn't pull away. That night, they shared stew in the cookhouse with the others, their shoulders brushing as they sat. No one jeered anymore. No one dared. The men had seen her work, watched her take the cold and the labor without complaint. Respect had replaced ridicule, though it had arrived quiet and without fanfare, the way most real things do. As the fire burned low and the others drifted off, Varen lingered near the back door, lantern in hand. "You coming?" he asked. She followed him outside, into a night thick with stars. They stood for a long while beneath the sky, the wind low, the world hushed around them. Then Varen said, "Next week, we'll raise the roof beams. After that, it'll be livable." Elira turned toward him. "And after that?" He hesitated, then said, "We make a home. If you're still sure." She stepped close enough to see the stubble along his jaw, the faint scar at his temple. "I'm sure," she said. "I've never been surer of anything." Varen didn't kiss her then. He just reached up, took her hand, and folded it against his chest. And for the first time in years, Elira felt the future not as a shadow, but as something warm and steady, waiting to be built, one beam at a time. The first snow came soft and early, brushing the earth with a thin white veil that melted by noon, but left behind the promise of more. Elira stood on the unfinished porch of the cabin, one hand resting on the raw edge of the doorframe, watching flakes drift through the pale morning light. The scent of cutwood clung to her coat, and her breath curled in front of her like smoke. Varen stepped down from the ladder, brushing sawdust from his sleeves. "We'll finish the windows today," he said, nodding toward the glass panes stacked on a canvas tarp nearby. "If the weather holds." She glanced at the sky. "We've got a few hours. Maybe less." He looked at her, then at the mountains beyond. You remember what I said about the spring? She nodded once. I was thinking we'd ride out there this afternoon. If you're willing. She didn't answer right away. Then she turned, pulled her gloves tighter at the wrists. You leading or following? His mouth twitched. That depends. The trail was narrow and sloped, cutting through stands of fir and bare-limbed aspen. Snow clung to the higher branches, but the ground remained clear enough for the horses to navigate. Varen rode ahead, his shoulders relaxed beneath his coat, reins loose in his gloved hands. Elira followed close behind, the hush of the woods wrapping around them. They reached the spring as the sun settled low behind the ridge. Steam rose from the water in slow curls, and the rocks surrounding it were dark with moisture and warmth. The horses drank from the edge while Varen knelt to test the heat. You ever seen water like this? He asked. She crouched beside him. Not outside of stories. My father used to talk about springs that never froze, said they were healing places. Quiet places. Varen dipped his fingers in, then let the water drip back into the pool. I came here the first winter I was in Montana. I'd been working a line camp up near the pass, alone most days. I wasn't sure I'd stay. She studied the surface, how it barely rippled. What changed? He didn't answer right away. Then, I remembered what it felt like to be still. That's what this place gave me. They sat on the flat rock, boots nearly touching. The horses stood nearby, tails flicking at the cold. After a quiet stretch, Elira asked, Do you think we'll be content here? Not just settled, but truly content. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. I don't think contentment comes in the shape of land or cabins. I think it comes from knowing who you're beside when the hard seasons come. She looked at him fully then, her face unreadable. You don't talk like a man who's lived easy. I haven't, he said. But I've learned that peace doesn't always arrive as comfort. Sometimes it shows up as quiet between two people who understand each other. She turned back to the pool, her voice low. I used to think quiet meant something was missing. Now I think maybe it's the thing that makes room for everything else. They stayed until the light began to thin and the cold pressed in deeper. As they mounted up, Varen reached across the saddle to adjust the collar of her coat, his fingers lingering only a second longer than needed. On the ride back, she asked, What will we do once the cabin's finished? We'll keep the herd in shape. Mend fences. Prepare for calving in spring. And after that, he glanced sideways. Whatever you want. She hesitated. I've been thinking we could keep a few chickens. He gave a short nod. We'll need a coop. I'll draw up something. And maybe plant a bit of garden come thaw. Beans, onions, squash, he said. You'd be good at that. She looked ahead, where the trail widened toward home. I want to learn how to make a life that doesn't feel borrowed. One that's mine and yours. Together. Varen reached over and gently touched her hand where it rested on the horn. Then we'll build it, he said. One season at a time. That night, they didn't return to the bunkhouse. They laid out bedrolls on the plank floor of the half-finished cabin, the fire crackling in the new stove, warmth building slow in the corners. Varen lay beside her, his hand resting between them, not touching, but close enough. Elira stared at the ceiling beams above, the ones they'd raised together. You ever think about marrying? She asked. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Only once. She turned toward him. And now? He met her gaze. I think about it every time I look at you. She reached for his hand. Then ask me. He sat up, the firelight catching the worn line of his jaw. Elira Langston, will you build this life with me? All of it. She reached up, her fingers brushing his cheek. I already have, she said. And outside, the snow began again in earnest. The roof was on before the second heavy snow. Varen ran his palm along the ridgeline beam, testing the pitch, while Elira stood below with a length of canvas folded over her arm. The wind tugged at her braid, and the smell of packed earth and raw wood filled the stillness between them. He climbed down, boots thudding against the frozen ground. Think it'll hold through a thaw and freeze? She asked, eyeing the slope. It'll hold, he said, brushing sawdust from the back of his neck. We pitched it tight enough to shed water, and I've got shingles laid thick on the north side. Elira nodded, stepping inside. The walls had been chinked with moss and clay, the stove set firm against the far corner with a short stack of split pine beside it. A hand-carved table stood under the window, and Varen had built a bench wide enough for two, sanded smooth where the grain curled like smoke. She ran her fingertips along the frame of the door. It feels like it's waiting. He leaned beside her, arms folded, breath clouding in the cold. It's not waiting anymore. That evening, they unpacked the last of the crates from the ranch. A kettle, a chipped enamel basin, a pair of wool blankets, and a tin box of letters Varen hadn't opened in years. He tucked the box beneath the bed frame without comment. Elira didn't ask. She didn't need to. Instead, she opened the flour sack and began mixing dough for the next morning's biscuits, her sleeves pushed up past her elbows, hands dusted pale. Varen chopped kindling near the stove, glancing over occasionally as though to memorize the shape of her moving there, quiet and sure. Later, with the fire steady and the cabin warm for the first time, Elira untied her boots and set them by the hearth. "You never told me about your mother," she said, settling beside him on the bench. "She died when I was 19, Varen replied, gaze on the flames. "Pneumonia. Came fast, left faster. Did she get to see you before you left Virginia?" He shook his head. "I buried her before I joined the cavalry. After that, I didn't see home again." Elira rested her chin on her knees, arms wrapped around them. "Did you want to?" "Not at first," he said. "But later, I missed what I thought it might have been. The smell of her bread. The way she called me boy no matter how tall I got." She reached out, fingers grazing the back of his hand. "Grief doesn't leave. It just changes shape." He glanced at her, eyes steady. "And yours?" "My father died slow. Consumption. I kept the fire going, boiled cloth, poured broth past lips that stopped swallowing. He was gone before my brothers sold the land." "You stayed with him," Varen said, his voice low. "I had nowhere else." He turned his hand under hers, fingers lacing through. The warmth of it settled her deeper than the fire ever could. Days passed, the snow thickening, the outside world hushed under the weight of winter. Inside, they moved around each other like clockwork, measuring flour, hauling water, repairing a latch, stitching a torn seam. They didn't speak of what they were building, not aloud. It didn't need naming. One afternoon, while Varen was scraping ice from the roof edge, Elira stood just inside, watching the light shift across the wooden floor. She had hung a length of blue fabric over the window, a scrap from her mother's apron, long saved and now repurposed. She pressed her hand to the windowsill, where his carving knife had left small notches, marks of a man learning to shape permanence. "Varen," she called, stepping out into the cold. "I want a garden. South-facing, with a row of currants, if we can get the cuttings." He climbed down slowly, brushing ice from his coat. "We'll dig it come thaw. And I want chickens. Maybe 6. I'll build the coop." She stepped closer. "And I want a wedding. Not a church one. Just a day that belongs to us." His face didn't change, but his eyes warmed. "What day?" "The next clear one. I don't care if it's snowing." He reached for her hand, gloved in wool, and squeezed once. "Then I'll make a ring." True to his word, he whittled it from a piece of elk bone, smoothed with beeswax, and wrapped at its base with a thread of her old riding rope. He gave it to her with no speech, just a nod and a hand held out, and she slid it on without hesitation. They wed a week before the new year, just the two of them, standing beneath the wide sky with frost cracking beneath their boots. He said her name like a vow. She said his like a promise already kept. There were no witnesses but the wind and a doe that passed silent through the trees. That night, in their bed layered with wool and stitched cotton, she curled against him, her breath warm against his throat. "I never thought I'd be chosen," she said. "You weren't," he whispered. "You were met. Step for step." Years passed, the kind that come quiet and full of work. The chickens arrived in spring, clucking and fussing. The garden grew tall with beans and summer squash, and Elira taught Varen how to stake tomatoes without bruising the stems. He built shelves for her jars, pickled beets, honeyed carrots, and the currants she had wanted. They never had much beyond what they needed, but it was enough. More than. Each winter, they returned to the hot spring, soaking beneath steam and sky, their hands wrinkled and strong, the silence between them deeper than ever, but never empty. They spoke little in those hours. They didn't have to. One summer, travelers stopped at the ranch, a couple and their son, asking if help could be found. Varen rode out with the man to mend a broken axle. Elira shared bread with the woman, showed the boy how to coax a hen to feed from his palm. When they left, the woman pressed a letter into Elira's hand. "You've made something here," she said. "It stays with a person." Elira read the letter aloud to Varen that night by lantern light, then folded it and tucked it in the tin box beneath the bed. They never went east. They never needed to. Everything worth keeping had already been found. And in the last years of their life together, when their hair turned silver and their hands bore the map of every season, they still woke before dawn, still ate together at the table he'd built, still touched hands in passing like a habit too deep to name. When Varen passed, it was in the cabin they'd raised beam by beam, in a bed framed by their own labor, with Elira's hand resting over his heart. She stayed 2 more winters, tending the chickens, keeping the garden turned, her steps slower but certain. On the spring morning she died, the sun rose strong, melting the last of the frost. A neighbor found her seated on the porch, her eyes closed, her face turned toward the light. They buried her beside Varen, under the cottonwood by the creek. The carving on the stone read only, held, always, and the life they built stayed standing.